Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on depression, and really what I want it to be is an exposition of the neurological factors that are involved with depression. I will talk about the um, etiology of what we currently understand in terms of neurochemistry and neuroscience in general in terms of neurophrenology of somebody who more appropriately should be called to say an individual who deals with clinical depression. I'm not going to be saying that this is all about clinical depression, but depression as a human phenomenon in general, and really try and I think explicate speculations. I don't want anybody to take these things as if you struggle with depression, please see a licensed psychologist. I don't want anybody to take these things as cures or anything like that, but they're just speculations, really ruminations I've had because I've been reading literature on depression, and I am involved in a relationship with somebody who is fairly neurotic and goes through depressive spells. So I've thought about this for quite some time, and so given the study and the personal interest in the whole phenomenon, and I've dealt with depression at various points in times in my life, so I thought, go ahead, this is safe information considering I've done enough research and have seen personal benefit and have helped someone else that at least it's safe enough to be anecdotal homeopathic remedy or something through psychoanalyses. Something of that variety or another. So on first about the neurochemistry of depression. Depression is an interesting phenomenon, as first human emotion is due to the movement of neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are the agencies that give us our feelings. Emotions are the drives themselves, and the drives would exist as you can think of the drives as sub-personalities that exist in the brain, and the drives that are most important to think about in terms of depression is mostly sadness and panic. Panic may be a surprise to most people because what most people think when they think of somebody who's dealing with depression is somebody who's continually sad. Somebody who's dealing with depression is dealing with a great deal of panic. It's an overactivity of the panic system in the brain, and this is the system that regulates the levels of cortisol within one's bloodstream. It's what causes stress. Stress levels, when you're looking at a depressed person, you're looking at somebody who's dealing with high levels of stress. They're highly stressed prone. When somebody's highly stress prone, people typically think that sadness, which is responsible for fear or exclusion, is the thing that's most susceptible to the more negative aspects, but it's now shown and can be linked with the levels of cortisol that high levels of cortisol promote most of the negative spells of thinking in terms of feeling worthless and even eventually leading to suicide. It's why people say stress is not good for you or stress can kill you, because there is a notion of truth to that, as somebody who has depression has high levels of cortisol with low levels of serotonin. Serotonin is a inhibitory agent and something that uptakes and regulates the levels of cortisol and makes one feel calm. Not necessarily happy, but satiated and calm. when there is a lack of serotonin, there's nothing to be an inhibitor to the rising levels of cortisol in one's brain. So they don't need to be ridiculously high, but it's typically a lack of serotonin and an overactivity in terms of the panic system that gives this influx that takes and then communicates fear and other items to the person to essentially start having other transmitters come on to be rather hyper vigilant about risk. And you can see that the depressive person is very overly concerned with risk, and they're looking to be pain avoidant, and they essentially look at the world as one big pain mechanism, something that can hurt them, and they get rather frightened and unmotivated by this, and this is how fear and sadness play into it, because fear and sadness, that system of the brain is the downregulating motivational agency, as it tends to suppress the propagation of dopamine, norepinephrine, and other various neurochemicals that are responsible for joy, elation, and drive. Going out and being reward-seeking in the environment. The reward-seeking network is honestly dampened in the depressive individual. And so the standard solution, or at least what the original thought and solution was for in terms of pharmaceutical care, was to create SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, because the idea and the thought is that if you uptake serotonin within one's neurochemistry, it will combat the levels of cortisol and help the depressive person. But what certain researchers found out was that these SSRIs did not, they limited the person's attention and interest in things in the world in general. After a while, they repress their sex drive, and they repress even their ability to be continually attached in a romantic interest to their partners, and they did not necessarily repress suicidal thoughts, and it was not clear if they led to them, help produce them, but it was certainly ruled out that they don't do anything necessarily about them. So what was found out is that serotonin is not necessarily the answer, though it seems to be a prime factor in the instigation of something. People who are typically satisfied and feel secure are not depressed people. People who tend to be more neurotic tend more towards depression. That's why people who are higher in trait conscientiousness don't really feel depression, because they achieve a certain level of social status and keep up a certain level of dutifulness and workaholism that keeps them essentially from the bay of the beast in a way, and keeps them from depression, and that's because they load higher in serotonin than other individuals. What's interesting that researchers show is that, people who are higher in serotonin aren't necessarily happy either. So they tend to be calm, or they tend to just be in a certain way in life to where they keep enough tragedy away from them, or they built up enough stability and security that they don't really feel pained or bothered. They're not suffering, and you'd be more surprised that people are more interested in not suffering than they are interested in being happy. That's a majority of people, but that bodes an interesting thing for the depressive, as the commitment to security and things and stability aren't necessarily the restorative elements. And so Jaak Panksepp is a brilliant neuroscientific researcher who passed away not too long ago, who started being the man to really show the rationale for emotion and motivation within mammals in general and the human being. And one thing he discovered was the play circuit in the brain. The play circuit in the brain is the thing that causes people to be joyous. It's not necessarily happiness, but it's like a pro-social excitement for possibility and spontaneity. It's something like that, which just can be encapsulated as joy. It's one of the positive emotions, but it's not positive emotion in general, because positive emotion is a collection of things. So what the depressed person is missing is the propagation of positive emotion in their life. So the new direction in pharmaceutical research is to figure out how to increase levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and other neurochemical agencies that aren't coming to mind immediately, because getting one to be out in the environment and seeking things is probably the best space for the depressive person to be in. And this is something that you see that's really interesting in therapy for bipolar individuals, because people with bipolar mood disorder experience two ends of a tail of depressive and manic symptoms. So if you want to best regulate the things, you want to create a kind of healthy dopaminergic stream that's not too fluctuating and not too chaotic. So one thing that is recommended to those individuals is to get out into the environment, have goals, and establish routine. Establish routine and have goals, meaningful goals that you want to pursue. Because, and this is, okay, well, because pursuing a goal denotes value, and when you're pursuing a goal and mediating yourself towards a goal, you receive a hit of dopamine for getting closer to it. You also receive a hit of serotonin for being, that's why you get rather panicky and anxious when you're not achieving whatever it is you're supposed to be achieving or value. But nonetheless, you experience negative emotion for getting further away from your goals, but you experience a whole great deal of positive emotion for getting closer to them. Not necessarily for achieving them, but definitely for getting closer to them. You experience a cocktail of opioids for reaching and achieving them, so you feel kind of elated and things like that, euphoric, but not necessarily happy. It's another kind of positive emotion, but it's not really happiness. The thing of the giddiness and the happiness comes with the anticipation of the reward, but not necessarily the reward itself. And for some individuals, rewards fall deaf on them in the first place. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that if somebody deals with depression, the truth is if it's not clinical depression, because you do need help with that, because they're real, so I suppose Campbell and clinical depression at this point, because there's real neurophrenological reasons for why the clinical depressive has more to contend with than somebody who's just facing a really bad hand in life, because there's multiple reasons for being depressed. You can be depressed for biological reasons. There's certainly biological instantiations in both factors, but you can be genetically depressed, more so. Genetically depressed is the best way to say it. Or you can be environmentally depressed in terms of the lower you are on the dominance hierarchy or within a social ladder, the more tendency you have to face severe elements and agencies of reality to communicate to you in a sense that you're going to die. That's ultimately why nobody likes to be at the bottom of a dominance hierarchy, because you're more likely to die at the bottom of a dominance hierarchy. For example, you just look at anybody who's homeless. They don't have the greatest amount of health in the world, and they're not necessarily the most positive people, really, if you talk to them, and they're fairly mentally unstable, but that's for multiple reasons. But the one thing that one can really denote is that they die rather a lot. And that's why liberals in general are very much about looking at the out and oppressed group and trying to mediate the inequality between people, because they're basically just trying to say these people at the bottom are prone to death, and we want to keep them away from it. That's what the kind of innate pro-social goal is to keep others of my kind away from dying. And so that's what liberals try to sprinkle on to the political scene. But nonetheless, it's something of a anecdote, if you will, about why there's more than one way to be depressed, and why there's danger in both ways, because there's more than one way to make somebody suicidal, essentially. But both are just as damn potent and dangerous. But you can do the same kind of therapy with somebody who's genetically depressed or clinically depressed, but they need more help than just trying to beat it. Trying to beat it, that's the worst thing to tell them. Telling them to get over it is not helpful. Trying to beat it is not going to be the thing for them. However, individuals who find themselves in the grips of the tragedy of existence, there is a way for them to overcome, and they are the ones that you have to encourage to try to beat it. Not in the sense that you don't have empathy and understanding for where they're at in life, but also in the same vein that if you want a depressive person if you want to get somewhat better when dealing with depression, you have to do two things, and we can turn to Nietzsche for good help about what some of those two things were, because Nietzsche was a depressive, unbeknownst to most people. You need to swallow the toad, one, meaning that, yes, the one thing that's dangerous about liberalism, if you're depressed, liberalism may not help you in certain ways, because it makes it very easy for you to have what many right-wing critics call a victim mentality. And victimization, not really the best thing. The reason why victimization is not the best thing is because it does not help the individual see their agency in their lives. It does not exclude the possibility of them seeing their agency in their lives and being able to do something about their situations, or the greatest extent of what they can do about their situations. But people, and for multiple reasons, tend to see mostly what's wrong with others in the world, rather than seeing what they can do to help them out of their conspiracy, and better for the hand that they played in their conspiracy. I will never say that anybody deserves what they get, or they got what's coming to them. And happiness may not be the meaning of life, but it's never fun to be depressed and things. I mean, melancholy is one thing. I'm melancholic just innately, but depression's a different thing, And so, with those individuals, though, you have to realize, maybe out of ignorance or naivety, there are some things that they did to help be a conspirator in their own tragedy, essentially. So, the items of anything from resentment to envy to laziness, there are so many reasons about what's wrong with the world. There's so many things wrong with the world. The lists of grievances and just outright terror and horror that exists out in the world is infinite. You can't count all the things that are wrong, like in the slightest. It's there. And there's hate in the world. There's vilification in the world. There's misanthropy in the world. There's nihilism in the world. There's greed. There's unfairness. There's a lack of love. Not just, hate is not the opposite of love, but there's just a complete lack of love in the world. There's a complete lack of fraternity, lack in some people. There's just malevolency and evil, and they're real things. There's nothing untrue about those things. They're definitely there. And it's why pessimism is a thing. And it's why some philosophers come with the sentiment that better not to live, and if you live to die quickly is the best lot for you. Not that pessimistic, but I'll say I definitely understand where they're coming from, but the truth should not apprehend or prevent the individual from doing what it is that they can to have some equanimity and meaning in their life. The thing is that you have to swallow that, yes, that's true about the world, but what's also true about you? Yeah, that's true. I'm never going to tell somebody that life isn't tragic. Yeah, it's tragic. I will not ever argue with you about that. But what responsibility do you have in the face of that tragedy? That's the question you have to ask. You are not helpless. You are not helpless. So you have to try and beat it. That's the first place that you can start. And that's swallowing the toad, essentially. The next is a high goal. You have to have, and this is the problem with nihilism. So nihilism is not just pure meaninglessness. Nihilism is the negation of values. Nihilism says nothing has any intrinsic value. A nihilist doesn't really believe that there's no such thing as meaning. A nihilist says nothing has value, so the only thing that they notice is negative meaning. Because they don't have any values, they only see negative meaning. Because values, when you value something, it gives a metric. This is something high, this is something low. For as much as people don't like morality, it does serve a purpose here that I'm being a good person, I'm not being a good person. You know, you can toggle between the two. But striving to this thing of the good person, or striving to this thing of what you value, you don't even have to be moral. Like, it can be anything that you value, a goal that you really prize, gives you something that mediates positive meaning. Because the way that the reward system works in the brain, you're not reaching for anything, you're not feeling good about anything. That's why people who don't do anything aren't particularly enthusiastic or fun people to be around, because even if they're not nihilistic, they're at the very least apathetic, because a person without goals is a person without meaning, quite honestly, from a neuroscientific standpoint, in the sense that if you're not pursuing something you value, where's the dopamine going to come from? Because it's really not going to come from any other place. You can do that either from anthropomorphic values like sex. That's the other thing that can take and help a depressed person out. Or you can do them, depending on your circumstances or whatever, you can do it from uncovering your intrinsic values and finding things out in reality that affirm those things and pursue those. And that's the much more plausible solution for a whole number of reasons, whether you're religious, non-religious, secular, or whatever. The point is that you have to set yourself a goal and a seemingly difficult task, because it has to be meaningful. It's meaningful because its pursuit takes and transforms you into something. Well, neurochemically provides you dopamine, norepinephrine. When you achieve it, provides you so let me stay on one point. When you achieve it, provides you another reward in terms of another neurochemical cocktail, but also builds skill and competency, because you becoming better at something or doing something will make you a person that's more able and useful in the environment. And you will like to be more useful, because when you're useful to yourself, you're more useful to other people. So you can even get a boost in the status of a community or a hierarchy of some sort. You generate, by generating meaning for yourself, you have the potential to generate meaning for others, and they receive this thing and affirm and generate meaning for you more in terms of your appreciation as a social agent. It's just the way that things go, or can work themselves out, and so much as so is that your life is not completely stricken by tragedy. And I'm not going to tell you that tragedy isn't going to sink you sometimes, because it is. But, it's the ability to transform and overcome. That's the thing that I think the depressive person has to identify with. Not that there isn't problems in the world. Not that the world's not tragic, because God knows I know the damn thing's tragic. It's the fact that you are something that's innately made to overcome things from a biological standpoint, because you have a reward-seeking network and you have a play circuit in your brain, things to produce an innumerable amount of positive emotions for you so that you can be the very thing that can overcome the tragedy of existence. That's part of your evolutionary inheritance, just like the pro-social nature of you, and just like the nefarious will-to-powering nature of you. It's all you. But, I mean, you can rock it all, to some extent. Now, I think that the thing for people is try and stay away from nihilism, for the mere fact that it does discredit anything of value. Because one thing that people are really searching for is some underlying justification for this life, some underlying justification for their actions or anything. Because when you put the individual in a landscape where nothing has any value, they really don't know what the hell to climb for. It's why Christopher Hitchens said he existed in a howling wilderness. But he had his things. Like, even Hitch had his things. I mean, like, you got to have your things to generate some positive emotion. Because the generation of positive emotion is the only antidote to the travesty and the pure horror of existence. And it's not to ever be overly positive or naive, because, like, just saying that nothing hurts, or you're not depressed, or things don't, or nothing's really all that bad is stupid. Like, that's just stupid, and that's how you get a freaking pathology, or you wind up repressing something. I mean, that's not the point. But the point is to overcome. And, I mean, there's multiple reasons to think that that's the antidote to just the complete terror and tragedy of things that is so deeply understood and felt by the depressed individual. And the hero story is definitely one of them. You have to go on a hero's journey in some respects, because you have to have a goal and you have to play. And play is the other antidote. I mean, the fact that, and I think this is why depression's rising in Western states, is because we don't play worth a damn. Or we do this binging thing. Like, and I'm not going to talk about binging in this video. Like, I have my own thoughts on that whole deal. But it's like, legitimately play. Legitimately play. Like you're a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. It's about the only thing. Play and goals. That's about the only thing that's going to actually help you. But you can only do that by accepting the responsibility of self and overcoming the tragedy of existence that you're strapped down and burdened with. It's your freedom. And freedom is a burden. It's a responsibility. But it is the very thing that generates the restorative qualities that you need to face it all, essentially. And those are just my thoughts on depression. Those are the things that I've come to understand for myself as an individual. They're what I promote in a relationship. And I'm not ever telling anyone it's easy. And, you know, what the hell are my innate values and things like that, and how do I overcome them? Because there's so many ways in the world for you not to really know yourself. So, yeah, that's another video. But in the end, the fact is you can do it. I mean, you can do it. You just try to beat it. And you're not completely helpless. So, I believe in you for whatever that's worth. So, that's my video on depression, and thank you for watching.